So the Detroit Pistons are super stuck, and they're in the worst position you would ever want to be in as an NBA team, which is they're not good, but they're not like Atlanta Hawks levels of not good, so they don't have a chance at like one of the top 3 to 5 picks or whatever, and they're probably not even going to get their pick this year because of the Blake Griffin trade. And speaking of the Blake Griffin trade, Blake Griffin has an insane contract that goes until 2022, where he's making over $30 million a season starting next year. And overall, the team has no cap space whatsoever. They're at $117 million next year, and that's before potentially re-signing Anthony Tolliver, a player who was good for them this season. So you're just really in a tough spot if you're the Pistons, right? Not good, but still too good to get a really good player in the draft, typically. And you're loaded with salary. And you're probably not going to get your first round pick this season. Now, among all this stuff, I do think there are some things the Pistons could explore to potentially help themselves out. And the first thing I want to start with is the idea that Andre Drummond is still improving as a player, okay? He's 24 years old. He got better this year. Free throws went in more. He stopped posting up as much, although it seemed like he posted up a little bit more once Blake got there. And then, he improved as like a playmaker, right? He was making passes at the top of the key, and he was beating opposing bigs off the bounce sometimes. Drummond got a little better this year, so that's a good sign, okay? The next saving grace is, to me, Luke Kennard, who I think has a lot of potential as a scorer for them. Now, defensively, he might have some problems that he's never able to overcome, but at least he can put some points up, right? As a standstill shooter, catch and shoot guy, I think he's got some decent ball handling abilities, and he could also hit jumpers off the bounce, moving as well off the ball. So I like Luke Kennard there, and I also think him, Reggie Bullock, if you re-signed Anthony Tolliver, that's like a decent amount of shooting along the wing, and I think those guys together could fit in well with Blake and Drummond when one of them plays center. As far as when both of them are in there, it's a little more rough. So there's that for you. And I'll get into like trades that you could make in a moment here, but then I also want to talk about Reggie Jackson a little bit. I think your best bet with Reggie Jackson really is to do what Stan Van has done, which is to play him and Ish Smith about 25 minutes a game each. The thing with Reggie is like, okay, they technically have a positive record with Reggie this year, but if you go down the latest stretch that they've had, it's been like all bad teams. They beat the Suns, the Knicks, the Mavericks, the Wizards without John Wall. They beat the Lakers. Like, they're not beating any impressive teams to get Reggie Jackson a positive record this season. And the thing with Reggie is, he plays like he's a top 7 point guard when really he's like the 17th best point guard in the NBA. So he's kind of rough, over dribbling, ill-advised shots, that sort of thing. But I do think, there is a guy in there who can have a decent pick-and-roll thing with Blake and Drummond. And, once again, don't play him too much, and hopefully you can just manage that, right? Okay, that's the basketball stuff. If we get to potential trades, I think the most interesting player on this team in terms of a potential move is Stanley Johnson, because he just finished his 3rd season. Defensively, he's pretty decent. Offensively, he's got problems, right? He can't shoot from pretty much anywhere. And I do think he's got some abilities as a ball handler. He did shoot about 2 free throws a game this year, which is something. But still, he's got problems, and once they went to Reggie Bullock at the starting 3, it seems like the offense clicked a little bit more. According to Basketball Reference, their net ratings are basically on 2 different sides of the spectrum. Bullock's very positive, Stanley's not very positive at all. Makes sense, Bullock's been lights out from 3 and Stanley can't shoot. Do you entertain the idea of trading Stanley Johnson? Because if you did, I think you could get a first-round pick for this draft. Now, as far as where it would be, I don't really know. I assume no one would give you a lottery pick for the guy, but I don't know, the 17th, 18th pick. It at least gets you back into the draft, and as we've seen, it doesn't really matter where you're selecting. If you nail it on that one guy, then you got yourself a player, right? So I would definitely think about that one. There's a chance that you could also acquire someone who is more of a veteran on a team that has just kind of like given up on him. I know there were rumors before Utah traded him to Cleveland that Rodney Hood for Stanley Johnson could have been a thing. You know, something like that. A team like Utah that's a bit younger, and Rodney doesn't really fit in given that they have Mitchell and Rubio in the backcourt, and you know, you get someone like Stanley Johnson who can defend 3s and 4s and be more of a defense first kind of guy. Something similar to that, you know. Now, as far as what that move could potentially be, I don't know. I can't think of it off the top of my head. So I think you definitely think about moving Stanley Johnson if you can get into this draft, or you can get something, you know. Now, one other thing Detroit has for them is they do have either the mid-level exception or the taxpayer exception. I don't entirely know, just because I'm not a genius when it comes to the salary cap in terms of, like, can you use the mid-level to get over the luxury tax line, all that stuff. Because they're at $117 million right now, and the tax is $123, so they don't have a lot to play with. But I think one guy who you could go for with that is Mario Hezonja, okay? Someone who has been good for the Magic the last stretch of the season, and I think he is another wing who you could fit into what you have going on here, especially if you chose not to re-sign Anthony Tolliver, which, depending on the timing of it all, you would not be able to then acquire Hezonja unless you found a way to get like Galloway's money off the books, which is probably not going to happen given that it ends in 2020. I think that's about all you really have of the Pistons. You have the Stanley Johnson potential trade to get into this draft or get a different young player or something, and then you've got the little money that you do have left on your exception. And if you didn't want to go for Mario Hezonja in free agency, there is Glenn Robinson III, who, I mean, he's like a higher floor, lower ceiling than Hezonja is. Because, I mean, what was Hezonja, like the 4th pick or whatever it was? Like, if Mario ends up being what we think he's going to be, then he could be like a big, pretty decent scorer. Whereas Glenn Robinson's like a really good role player. Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, I'm going down the list of free agents, and I feel like in terms of guys you could afford and guys who have potential, Hezonja might be like the one. Well, to be fair, there is also Trey Burke, and if you want to buy into what he's been doing with the Knicks, then, I mean, maybe that solves your point guard issue. Who knows? There are a few young names in free agency that I think you could afford with the little money that you do have to play with if you are this Pistons team. And I guess in terms of potentially getting salary knocked off, I mean, there's no way you're going to be able to move Reggie, Drummond, or Blake. I think you're looking at either John Lure or Langston Galloway, but, you know, like, their contracts are up after 2020, so that's kind of tough. So I think what I'm getting at is the Pistons are definitely in a tough spot, but I think you got a couple little things. From a basketball standpoint, I think you do have enough shooting on this team to where you could surround either Blake at center or Drummond at center with, you know, Kennard, Bullock, Tolliver, and you can do some stuff with that. In terms of when Blake and Drummond are in the game together, you hope that Blake's three-pointer can just get to another level. You know, don't go crazy with Reggie and Ish in terms of minutes because they both have problems. Consider moving Stanley Johnson for a pick this draft and just kind of trying again, if you will. Although I do think that Stanley Johnson still has some decent potential. And then besides that, just roll the dice on some young dude in free agency that you can actually afford. And, you know, see if he's good. And then if it doesn't work out, then Stan Van's gone, and then I really don't know what you do, because at the same time, like, this isn't really a team that you can just tear down and start over. Like, who the hell is going to take a Reggie Jackson and his contract, you know? So, yeah, those are the ideas I have. It's not easy. This team is in a very tough spot. But we'll just have to see what happens. So, shout out to the Pistons. Shout out to Eric Moreland. and I'm done.